Hi, I'm Paula with the Sweetland Digital Rhetoric Collaborative, and I'm joined here by Jenae Cohn, who is also a graduate fellow with the Digital Rhetoric Collaborative, and we're going to be talking today about ePortfolios. We're joined by two participants who use ePortfolios in very different kinds of writing classrooms, and hopefully we'll have two more joining us a little bit later on. So the first person I'm going to introduce, I'm just going to go from left to right here, is Daniel Von Holten, who's the writing instructor in the Department of English at Kansas State University, and he focuses on professional and workplace writing. We also have two over from the left, if our participants are in the same order for you, Karen Forgette, who is a core instructor in Writing 100 at the University of Mississippi in the Department of Writing and Rhetoric, and she also serves on the ePortfolio Research Committee. So let's start off with our first question here. You are all invited here to talk about ePortfolios because you work with them in different kinds of writing settings. So we're interested in knowing how ePortfolios fit into your work. How do you use ePortfolios, either Karen or Dan?
I'll let Karen go first.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Well, at the University of Mississippi, the ePortfolio is a part of our first-year writing sequence. And so students use it as a reflective space to metacognitively consider their writing. In the first semester, the audience for it is a personal audience of the student and his or her instructor. And in the second semester, the students continue to use it as a metacognitive space, but in the end, they refashion it for a more public audience. We're currently in discussion and consideration of how ePortfolio may fit into our new writing minor and perhaps into our first-year seminar course for first-year students, but that's all in a very preliminary stage of discussion.
Right now, with mine, like the ePortfolio isn't really a part of the a required part of the curriculum, or like really worked into the curriculum in my courses, like on like the broad level. Like I'm doing it in my courses, and one of my colleagues, Teresa Merrick, she's doing it in her courses, and that's kind of what inspired me to do it in mine. So I teach English 415 here, and it's a written communication for engineering students, and there's also a written communication for the workplace, which is 417. And I'm only doing the ePortfolio right now in the engineering group, and the idea is similar to Karen, and like to create like a space for them to do some self-reflection, to start thinking about themselves. But the audience for it is potential employers and perhaps potential clients, and so it's used at there's a very clear. In some ways, it's easier, I think, for the students to grasp the purpose and intended audience, and that they're already thinking about getting a job at this point because they're juniors and seniors. And I've noticed a lot of motivation from some of them on it.
Awesome. So we really can't ignore the concrete realities of ePortfolios. And I know at least Karen has worked with several different platforms. So what's worked as far as platforms for ePortfolios? Maybe what's been a good learning experience?
Well, we currently use Google Sites. We've been using that for the last several years. You know, I think choice of platform really depends on what you want to do with the ePortfolio in your program. And we do have some concerns that because Google Sites is, at least the way that we use Google Sites, is so sort of linearly, hierarchically structured, you know, with a page and then subpages, that the design of it doesn't necessarily lend itself to the type of reflection that we're asking students to do. So we're trying to think through the implications of that right now, whether sort of a blog format that could pull out into a larger page sort of looking thing might be better. But having said that, for the last several years, it's worked well for us in that it's free. Students are very familiar with it, or at least with Google products. And, you know, it has served us well. But just like you said, I don't know that there's ever a perfect thing, but I do think you have to consider the tool itself and whether the tool reinforces what you're trying to do rhetorically with students or not.
Mm-hmm.
And with mine, like I kind of leave it up to the students to choose a platform that becomes part of our discussion on ePortfolio early in the semester. And so I think just last week I had my students browse through, and like they had to all find different possible platforms to use for ePortfolios and write reviews on it, and look at how it could be used, like look at how flexible or non-flexible it could be. And we haven't really gotten into the deeper discussion on that, but we're going to hopefully use that as a means of talking about, like, you know, what advantages and disadvantages you get with things like WordPress that give you a lot of flexibility, or Weebly, and then things like Google Sites, which still give you a lot of flexibility but have certain restrictions. And then there are these portfolio-specific sites. I can't remember the names of some of them off the top of my head, but they basically already have a structure and format put together for you, but you can't really change it around. You can just upload a thing and then hope it works well. And so that's going to be part of our discussion in putting together the portfolio later.
Jenae, I know you and I talked a little bit about being interested in portfolios. If you want to jump in and add any questions, that's totally cool. So both of you just mentioned sort of your learning outcomes for using ePortfolios. Can you talk a little bit more about what it is you hope to accomplish in using ePortfolios, or what you hope your students get out of them?
You want to start that one, Dan?
Sure.
Yeah.
So the learning objectives for this. Oh, we have someone new.
Oh, well, Kate.
Howdy.
We're joined by Kate Birdsall. Now, Kate has, let's see. Kate's an assistant professor in the Department of Writing, Rhetoric and American Cultures at Michigan State. Kate, we were just talking a little bit about our learning outcomes when we use ePortfolios and kind of what we hope to accomplish. And I think Dan had started talking a little bit about that.
Gotcha. All right.
All right. So the learning outcomes on that, again, this isn't part of like the a larger departmental curriculum, but within the course, what I'm hoping to achieve with this is, one, to get some more focus on audience awareness, which is something that we kind of focus on throughout the course, but we're also looking at aspects of design and using visuals and color in a digital space, and also it's also a space for them to learn to self-assess and maybe reflect a little bit, which they don't always think is being relevant to them. They're usually very career focused and thinking, how does this apply to my career? And I think, well, I end up telling, like, well, what's going to happen when you have to do your first annual review and you're asked to do a self-assessment in your workplace, and that usually kind of makes things click with them. Karen, do you want to? I'm really interested in hearing what you have.
You know, it's a different situation with first-year students because we are using it as a space for reflection and metacognition. Really, our goals are to help them understand how to reflect effectively. But I think that maybe on a very elementary level, as they move into the second semester of our first-year writing sequence, they start on a very, very basic level to consider sort of the ideas that Dan was talking about in terms of design and layout. But remember, the audience for ours is really different too. I mean, the audience is primarily a personal audience and your instructor. And so you're not really sort of trying to feed something to an employer or somebody who would hire you. So I think there's a little bit of sort of digital literacy in there, but not a lot.
Paula, I think your mic is muted. There you go.
Yeah, I think Paula is muted.
Kate, you just got here. We talked a little bit earlier about how people use ePortfolios in their classrooms. So how do ePortfolios fit into your classroom and your teaching?
I do it as the final of 5 sequences. At Michigan State, our first year writing, we have what's called a Tier 1 writing requirement, and it's 1 class instead of 2. I know a lot of you are in 2-class scenarios. So we have a lot of ground to cover in 15 weeks. And I agree with everything Dan said about ideal learning outcomes. I'd also like to add that in my class, it functions as a kind of large culmination in a series of reflections. So it gets students to look back, I mean, as any portfolio system can do. It gets them to look back, but then kind of re-immerse themselves in the work that they did before. So, for example, we've got these 5 sequences, and the main job of the portfolio is A, create a website for yourself that you have. So you're learning transferable skills, which is something that I emphasize over and over again. And I find that even engineers get involved in this in a pretty compelling way. I started doing this simply because, I mean, we don't have mandated portfolios in our first year writing here, but I do it, again, because I prize reflection, transferable skills, and it's really, really cool to see what students can do in like a week. Right? Here's the assignment, make this happen, and they do it, and it's incredible.
So we've touched a little bit on how ePortfolios work into a broader departmental mission. Do ePortfolios play a role in your institutional assessment? Because I know in the NCTE best practices for ePortfolios, it's recommended. So how do ePorts fit into the broader institutional mission for you? Anybody?
Well, I'll say here at Mississippi, it's a work in progress. We have not found a great way to do distributed assessment with them. We've done some micro-level pilots of that have been okay, but no better or worse than distributive assessment of a research paper or something like that. For us, I think we're building toward maybe a larger application of ePortfolios, but I can't even say that we will necessarily get there, because I think, you know, we've had 5 or 6 years to work on this, and it just hasn't seemed to catch a ton of steam outside of our department yet. And even within our department, some of the people who are teaching upper division courses have actually abandoned it. So I don't know. It's a good question.
With mine, it's something I do myself just within the course. It's not a department-wide thing, so there isn't really any role that it plays in assessment within the institution right now. So I can't really address things any further than that.
Yeah, ditto. We don't even do a portfolio system at Michigan State.
We're getting there. It's a process. So some of you have talked a little bit about how you sell the value of the ePortfolio to your students. Does anybody want to talk a little bit more about that, especially for instructors who might be watching this and aren't quite sure how to communicate the value of the ePort to the students?
Yeah, I'll jump in. The transferable skills component. I know Dan also mentioned awareness of audience. And I think that's the key to how I teach writing is audience and rhetorical situation. And so giving them something where, you know, later down the line, if their boss says, hey, make a website, right, they know how to make it. And that's a big takeaway for me.
Yeah, mine is similar to that, and I would just add on that with mine, they're all juniors and seniors, and part of the portfolio for them is that it's a marketing tool for them, as a possible thing, like, you know, hey, you know, I want to work at your company, take a look at my portfolio and the work I can do, and what kinds of things I've done. And even if they don't get like a prospective employer to look at the portfolio, the process, I tell them, is that the process of just building the portfolio gives them talking points that they can use when they go and talk to a recruiter or go to an interview. They know what they want to talk about specifically as examples of what they're capable of doing and what areas for growth that they have. And part of what they do in the portfolio is identify directions for further growth. and things that they want to continue working on. And so it solidifies all of this in their heads, and they've got all this ready to go when they get into an interview situation. And I've had students come to me after class and say, like, I'm glad I did this, because now I know exactly what kinds of things I want to talk about when I talk to someone about, like, my career, or what kinds of things I can do as an engineer.
Yeah, and I would say, I'm sorry. I guess I would say that there's always the distinction, even in paper portfolios, between whether you're looking at a process portfolio or whether you're looking at a product or showcase portfolio. And I think that there's value in the process, because it is a lot of metacognition and a lot of self-reflection. And as you guys have noted, that there's value in sort of that showcase where you can show people what you can do. Anytime students are thinking about their writing processes, they're gaining from it. Now, whether ePortfolio pushes that reflection in a direction that's different, I'm still not convinced. We did talking about transferability, we did a study of transfer within ePortfolios with our first year writing students, and the results were pretty inconclusive. So I'm not sure that the platform itself, or the idea of ePortfolio itself, pushes transfer of learning. I do think reflection pushes transfer of learning. So.
And I'd love to add my own story too. I was working with a student one semester who had come from a rural area that didn't have a whole lot of internet connectivity. And at the beginning of class, she didn't know how to, like, double space for work. She was still learning how to use basic tools to compose. And it was amazing to see her grow throughout the course. And I remember when we set up the ePortfolio, she said, "Wait a second, does that mean that I have my website? Like, this is my website to keep?" Like, yeah. She's like, "That's so cool." It was like a really empowering moment for her to produce something that could be seen by a broader audience that it had never even occurred to her that she could be capable of making. So, I don't know, I thought that was pretty cool. So let's see. We've got time for one more question, because I know Karen's got to scoot out of here soon. Can you talk, any of you, about a particularly effective teaching moment around using ePortfolios in your classroom, like, and talk a little bit about what that made that moment so effective?
I think I already touched on it earlier, but it happened last semester, and it's going to happen again this semester too, by having my students go out and, like, review and choose different possible platforms to use for ePortfolios. It brings us to a conversation about, like, about what you can do with them, and whether you want something that's restricted or not. And this semester in particular, I had a lot of students were evaluating things like Weebly and WordPress, saying, well, it's not intended for ePortfolios, so it's probably not the best thing to use, since it's not specifically made for ePortfolios, but it has a lot of flexibility. And then other reviews of, like, these ePortfolio specific things, like, this is made specifically to do ePortfolios, and you just put your files in there and it presents them for you. And so that got us talking about, like, well, what if you want more control over how your information is presented? And so we got to talk about, like, platform choice and flexibility in the class, and it wasn't a particularly long conversation. It only maybe lasted, like, 10 minutes, I think, at most, maybe not even that long, but I could just see a lot of students writing down notes and, like, scribbling out, like, I saw a lot of them had, like, names of, so they were supposed to bring in the names of, like, 3 possible choices for platforms. I saw a lot of them, like, scribbling out names and, like, writing in new ones, and so I feel that was, it got them thinking, and I always think that's usually something good.
Yeah, I think picking up on that idea of thinking, I remember having the first student that I had who decided to link within the ePortfolio and then also outside of the ePortfolio. And, again, it was very sort of unscripted. I didn't ask her to do it. She just did it. And then in talking with her about it and talking about what pushed her to do that. The digital environment does add an interesting dimension of, how do you push somebody to the next peak? And so I think that was a lot of fun for me. I mean, that could have come in another assignment too, but I think the ePortfolio is the one that pushed her into it.
Yeah, I would second everything Dan and Karen have both said. It's really interesting to watch students examine visual rhetoric when it comes to their own composing choices, and kind of plan it out, do some storyboarding, right? What do I want this to look like? Look at examples, figure out why they're effective, why they're not effective, and then just another thing that I do that I didn't mention before is I have them self-scaffold this assignment. I mean, all semester, I give them kind of processy kind of dates, right? You're going to do this on this day, and this and this and this. And this is a moment where I say, all right, you've got to figure out how to manage your time here. And that becomes a really effective teaching moment, and it shows them that they actually do know how to do these things. That, again, I'm going to say it again, transferable skill, right? You've got an assignment. How are you going to figure out how to put it together and make it look cool?
Awesome. All right, so anybody have any final thoughts that they want to share, especially for teachers who might be considering going down the ePortfolio route?
I guess having worked with them for several years now, I think the one thing that I would caution people is to really think through the purpose of the ePortfolio in your classroom. Because I think until you have that clear and until you understand why you are using it very specifically, it can be easy to think of it as sort of just a general good thing to do. And I think you need to be much more thoughtful about why you're using it and let that purpose dictate sort of the tools that you look at and the ways that you approach it with students.
I would agree with that. I would also maybe add that if you're going to use ePortfolios in your course, make sure you include time throughout the semester to touch on aspects of that portfolio. So that, like Kate was mentioning, like having these reflective moments in the earlier parts of the course, just to think about it, because it's too easy for them just to think of it as like just this last minute thing. And if you touch on and I have mine start thinking about design now for the ePortfolio, what kinds of things we're going to put on it, as we get further and further through the semester, and that makes it seem much more relevant and to the students, and I think that it becomes like a major component of the course that way.
A kind of minor, I mean, I agree with both of what Dan and Karen are saying. A minor thing is I would suggest making it password protected or naming it something that is not easily found on Google. I mean, the amount of students that we teach every year, right, we want to avoid misunderstandings. And that's kind of the way I approach it. Name it something weird, like I had one that was called My Cute Kitty. And that way nobody can find it and pass it off.
And I think that's a really excellent point. At Mississippi, ours are all housed in our domain within Google, so you can't access it outside of the university. And then also we ask students to set the sharing permission so that you have to have the link in order to be able to view it. And I think those privacy concerns are very real and really important.
Definitely. And I think it's Weebly where there's a problem with password protecting, and so that became a moment. Like, all right, well, what are you going to name it? So then we can talk about that. So that kind of answers the teaching moment question, too.
Yeah, I think with mine, on the other hand, they're using it as like a self-promotion tool, and so we want it searchable. And that makes me think maybe I should have more discussion on how searchable or easy to find their website or portfolio should be. That's something I might start adding to my discussions on it.
Jenae, is there anything that you want to add or ask while we have these fabulous people here all in one place?
I will just do a quick plug here, since I know we're almost out of time. So I'm kind of been the invisible voice in the back trying to find some resources for us. So I'm going to quickly just share with you all, just for both the community here and whoever's watching this, some resources on the DRC that will continue the conversation. So we have a series in the DRC called the Hack and Yak series, and this is where we interview or include kind of conversations with folks talking about a variety of topics of interest to us. So Elizabeth Davis did a whole series on ePortfolios just last August that I'm kind of scrolling through now that, again, are a really nice extension of this conversation. But you can find the whole archive of those on our website here. So there's a lot more we could talk about, but for the sake of time, that's, I think, where I'll leave it.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. That was a great conversation. Yeah, we'll end it now. Have a great day, everyone. Take care.
Thanks.
Paula. Great to see you.
Bye.